once again.
Good morning once again, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I am Representative Fred Deutsch from District 4. Today I bring you House Bill 1076, an act to require that birth certificates accurately reflect biologic sex. I come to you today in humility, not hate. Reliable documents accurately record facts. House Bill 1076 addresses a topic that South Dakota statute has previously been silent on: the importance of accurate vital records. By definition, a vital record is a record of an event at an instant in time. A birth certificate records the vital data, including the sex of the person at the moment of birth. Today I want to talk to you about the problems our court system is having in uniformly applying the law to either grant or deny a change of sex on a birth certificate. And I want to discuss with you why that's important to South Dakota, to accurately record a person's biologic sex. On the bill that you have before you, Section 1 lays out the problem that we have in South Dakota. Currently, statute does not authorize a court to amend a person's sex on a birth certificate based on a person's subjective identification of sex when that identification is inconsistent with their objective biological sex. But the problem is, some judges have ordered sex designation on a birth certificate to be changed, either from male to female or female to male, while other judges have denied the request, noting that they don't have the authority. And at least one circuit court has explicitly recognized that courts are split on the issue. Because I believe the uniform application of the law by circuit courts is vital in the interest of justice, I'm bringing this bill as a remedy. Now, I've provided you a few documents to review. Two of them are decisions from different judges. Both judges ruled that the legislature has not provided them the authority to change a person's sex on a birth certificate. They're among the 15 or 16 different recent South Dakota court cases that I've reviewed in developing the first section of the bill. And I've just provided them for your perusal, so you can see firsthand the difficulties that many judges are experiencing with, to quote one judge, a law that is not clear in South Dakota, unquote. I've also provided you with a South Dakota birth certificate. The certificate contains two types of facts: legal facts, like the parents' names, and material facts, like the sex of the child. Some have asked why it's permissible to change legal facts on a vital record, like the name of a parent, but it's not permissible to change a material fact, like sex. And I believe there's basic rational principles that govern these decisions that I'd like to share with you. To change a legal fact requires legal proof, while changing a material fact requires material proof. So let's apply that concept. Legal facts, like the legal parents of a child, may be changed to reflect a new legal arrangement. So if I have a fight with my parents, I'm not able to march down to the legal records office and demand that my parents' name be erased from my birth certificate. As long as that remains a legally applicable fact, it must remain on the document. But once I provide legal proof that my best friend's parents have adopted me, the name can be changed. Just as legal facts require legal documentation, material facts, like a person's sex, requires material documentation. So how does one present proof that one's sex has changed when it's impossible to change sex? While gender is a matter of the mind, sex is defined as, quote, the immutable biological and physiological characteristics, specifically the chromosomes and internal and external reproductive anatomy that are genetically determined at conception, and generally recognized at birth, and which defines a person as being male or female. Taking hormones doesn't change a person's sex, nor does removing your genitals. The reality is sex cannot be changed. It's immutable, it's unchangeable, it's permanent, it's in our cells, it's even in our very DNA. So I'd like to move on from that explanation and share with you a question I've been asked. I think it's a really good question. I've been asked it a number of different ways, but it basically boils down to this. Why is it important that birth certificates accurately reflect biologic sex? In other words, why does all this really matter? So I want to share with you why it's important that South Dakota has a clear, biologically based definition of sex. First, having a clear biologically based definition of sex enables the state to protect the health and safety of South Dakotans that include tracking and monitoring disparities in mortality based on sex, identifying differences in life expectancy based on sex, evaluating socioeconomic inequalities based on sex, identifying disease epidemics and treatment, like we're doing right now with COVID. We understand that men die at a greater rate from COVID than women. Don't you think it's important to track that by biologic sex accurately? Also, identifying criminals based on sex and preventing identity theft and fraud based on sex. Also, having a clear biologically based definition of sex is important to the state in the maintenance of public policies that have been created to reflect biologic differences between the sexes, such as specific sex protections that are provided in Title IX. Next, how about clear biologically based definitions of sex for things like policies, such as insurance? For example, car insurance, which is based on years of documentation showing the difference between male and female drivers. And because of this research-based difference, they offer different rates. Or medical insurance, or long-term care insurance, both with very different rate structures because of differences between the sex. Or how about biology-based definitions for sex for youth camps, correction facilities, jails, mental health facilities, and medical providers in general who rely on the accurate representation of a person's biological sex. Having a clear biology-based definition of sex is important to protect the health of South Dakotans because of biologic differences, how they affect our lab and test results, our disease susceptibility, our medicinal doses, and a host of other sex-specific medical differences. I share all these things with you because South Dakota has a compelling interest in maintaining accurate, sex-based records. It matters to society in a lot of ways. This bill establishes policy that a sex may be changed on a certificate within the first year of life by simply submitting an affidavit. After the first year, the fact of a person's biologic sex on a birth certificate can only be changed by a court order upon the finding that the person's sex is inaccurate. Now, there are exceptions as you read in the bill. The exception is clerical errors, mistakes at a hospital in recording the data, also for congenital birth defects that make identification of sex difficult at birth. So the question we need to ask today is, what sort of public policy best secures and respects the lives and liberties, the safety and health, and the constitutional rights of South Dakotans? Is the acknowledgement of a science and sex-based, biologically determined definition of sex on the birth certificate in the best interest of society? And I would argue that it is. Either biology matters in our state policies, or it doesn't. And if biology doesn't matter, then every policy should be thrown out. We shouldn't have sex-based provisions at all in the law. The fact that we have many of these provisions that have been instituted and upheld over the years is an indication to me that there is indeed a rational basis for distinguishing between men and women in the law. Thank you for your time. I ask for your support, and I'll stand by for questions.
Thank you. Is there any other proponent testimony? Good morning.
Morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Norman Woods, FHA Action. And I want to start with a story or perspective, I guess. It was a few years ago, basically at the end of session. I think there's a few days left. I was standing outside the Senate looking across the rotunda, watching all the hullabaloo that we see during session, and I just realized that all of the controversy, because that was a controversial session, don't remember what the issues were, I know that'll shock you that we had controversy, right? All the effort, all the emotion, all the money spent, all the time invested, all the people coming, everyone that gets dressed early in the morning, it's all over words on a page. And that's all it boils down to. And in this case, we're not even talking about words on a page, we're talking about a couple letters on a certain document. And now, the fact that it's that simple, does that make it insignificant? Well, no, I think that actually makes it more significant. And I think everyone in this room would probably agree, we're talking about something very significant. But at the same time, it's very simple. What should the document say? How should we treat that document? And we're here as proponents of 1076 because we think that that document should be treated like a state record, a historical snapshot. This is what happened on this day. Here's the facts surrounding the event. And so we're here to ask for your support because we believe that 1076 puts forward a very reasonable framework for you as legislators to tell our courts, this is how we should treat that document. Because right now you have courts, some treating it one way, some treating it another way, one that's been asked to add new information to the document, and another that specifically said, hey, the law doesn't tell me what to do here. And so we're asking for your support because we believe 1076 puts forward a very reasonable framework for how we as a state should treat that document, that record, that historical snapshot. So I'd ask for your support. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other proponent testimony? Good morning.
Good morning again, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Chris Moritz. I'm the director of the South Dakota Catholic Conference, and we stand in support of House Bill 1076. So every human being is deserving of respect and to be treated with dignity. Dignity comes from a root word, dignitatis, means worthy. And I just want to emphasize that every person is worthy of love, of compassion, of respect. In the Christian understanding, we are all worthy. We have dignity because we're made in God's image. And I just pray that as we sort through contentious issues, that we might all see the profound dignity and beauty in each and every human person. So that's, I just wanted to say that right up front. I kind of want to focus a little bit, if I may, just on what the state's interest is, because I think that's an important question that you as legislators may have in your mind. Like, why, is this a distraction? Why should we care about this? So just begin with, like, what is the interest? You don't have to keep vital records. Why do you? So put another way, why does the state of South Dakota have vital records to begin with? Why do we keep track? So here's the crux of the bill. If you can answer that question, what data do we want those records to memorialize? So to help answer these questions, I'd like to offer just three thoughts, please. So the first thought is that a birth certificate is an official public document. It's not private property. It's a creation of statute. In a certain sense, it belongs to the state. It's not in the same category of thing as like a personal Facebook profile or TikTok account. It's not in the same category of things like my house that I can paint whatever color I wish, or my hair that I can style as I want, or my clothes. The government didn't tell me what to put on this morning. That was my sole individual discretion. The government doesn't and shouldn't care what I wear so long as I wear something. A birth certificate is not any of these private things. It's a public thing. And incidentally, a public thing, res publica, that's a republic. You know, our republic, that's our highest public thing. So the point is that it's a government record issued, archived, and used by a statutorily authorized state agency for some of the purposes that were already mentioned. It's also important to mention that they never go away. They last forever. It's not property that you can, leave in your will or sell. Per the statute, after 100 years, the state opens them all for inspection without limitation. So if you lose it or destroy it or have it stolen, you can apply to the state for a new copy. And that's not because the government is keeping a backup as a favor to you, as like a safety deposit box for your personal effects, but that's because the document belongs to the state. It's theirs, it's a state record. Second point, public health. To be clear, as I understand it, I think the state's interest is in keeping these records is public health and research, some of the reasons that were mentioned. So the collective or the aggregate vital data on a birth certificate, birthday, sex, weight, etc. These may be used by the state for various reasons in serving the common good, which in view of the Catholic Conference is the chief purpose of government, serve the common good. So the same can be said for death certificates. Someone's date of death, their sex, cause of death. There are very reasonable public health reasons to want to collect and track this data. So turning to my third and final thought. So if we think that it's appropriate for the state has an interest in keeping these records and would like to keep certain information available for the service of public health records, the final question is, should the information be accurate? I think that's the real question. So here's what the statute says. This is 3425.9. Quote, the physician in attendance at the birth or the physician's designee shall, within 5 days after the birth, obtain the personal data and the medical information required by the certificate. It goes on at 9.2, quote, either of the parents of this child shall sign a document attesting to the accuracy of the personal data entered on it, end quote. So I would submit to you, members of the committee, that yes, the state's interest is in accurate data that is observed by witnesses present at birth. That's in the statute. So the category of data that is on the certificate is sex, and this is kind of the crux of things. It's believed in the Catholic Conference, and in fact we believe just accords with right reason, isn't a esoterically Catholic belief, but that to be of the male sex or the female sex proceeds from one's body, not from one's inner experience. That's in the findings, section 1, I think 9 and 10. That's, you just look at the definition provided by the National Institute of Health. So as important as one's inner experience is to all human beings, self-included, that's not the information that the state requests nor needs on its vital records. When it comes to birth certificates, the state has no interest in your inner experience. So the state's interest is in data observed at birth, as sworn to be accurate by a parent in the few days that immediately follow. So members of the committee, I would submit to you that so long as the state believes that keeping vital records provides important data for public health purposes, and so long as it intends to keep these records, I would submit to you that these records should be accurate. I thank you for your favorable consideration. I'll stand by for questions.
Okay, thank you. We have about 2.5 minutes left. Is there any other proponent testimony? Do we have any other proponent testimony? Okay, so we'll move to proponent testimony. You will have your full 20 minutes. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Cooper Caraway. I'm the president of the South Dakota Federation of Labor. We represent thousands of working men and women and several trade, labor, and workers organizations across the state. First of all, I want to commend Representative Deutsch on his use of the word perusal. That's always fun to hear that word. So my members have quite a lot of issues with this bill. Number one, chief amongst them is the issue of individual liberty. It seems to us, Chief, amongst individual liberties to be able to present and identify yourself however you so choose. If the state or federal government, for that matter, do not consider the right to self-identification an inalienable right or a fundamental human right, perhaps you don't believe fundamental human rights exist. Second, we have an economic issue. Our folks, they're workers, they're hard workers, they want to attract business, they want to attract events, they want to attract college sports, playoffs, they want to attract all sorts of things. And if we look across the country, any time that states have seemed to take some of these more culture war issues and take hard stances on these things that seek to limit individual liberty and personal freedom, businesses pull out, events pull out. And what that means for South Dakotans
Can I
is
interrupt you for just a second?
Yeah,
Could
go
you
ahead.
state your name again, please? And could you state who you're testifying for?
Sure. Cooper Caraway, President, South Dakota Federation of Labor.
Okay, are you a registered lobbyist?
Yes.
And I don't see your credentials, that's what, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, no, I'll let you continue, I just,
Yeah, sure.
because I don't have my LRC staff right here, no, you're fine, you're fine. They just wanted clarifying online here, so, because they can't, they're not in the room, so
Yeah,
I appreciate it, go ahead.
All right, thank you. So our folks want to work, and overly restrictive bills like this, whenever they've popped up anywhere across the country, North Carolina, anywhere else, events are pulling out, new businesses are hesitating to come, and it prevents our folks' ability to work and feed their family. Third of all, I'll say South Dakota working families have gone through a lot this year. They'll continue to go through a lot in the years to come. Teacher pay is near the bottom in the country. Nurse pay is near the bottom in the country. South Dakota's workplace safety rating is 47th in the nation. What that means is that South Dakotans die at work at a rate that is more than twice the national average, and 1 in 4 children are dealing with food insecurity. What that means, food insecurity, what that means is that when they go to bed at night, they don't know where their next meal is gonna come from. And with all that going on, we look to our state government, who has precious little time to address many of these crucial issues. We look at our state government and they're waxing poetic about whether South Dakotans have the right or liberty to change an M to an F or an F to an M. This is embarrassing. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other testimony? Good morning.
Mr. Chairman,
Excuse me, oh, go on.
thank you for Roger Telling. I'm an attorney from Rapid City, and I'm a registered lobbyist for the Human Rights Campaign. And Mr. Chairman, with the committee's indulgence, I'd like to read a letter to the committee, please, from the Human Rights Campaign. Sarah Warbelow, who's the legal director of the Human Rights Campaign out of Washington, D.C. She couldn't be here today. I will then follow up with just a few of my own remarks. But dear Chairperson Jensen and members of the committee, the Human Rights Campaign, on behalf of its more than 3 million members and supporters nationwide, thanks you for the opportunity to submit testimony on HB 1076, a deeply harmful, discriminatory, and unconstitutional bill that attacks the dignity, safety, and well-being of transgender residents. We urge you to swiftly reject this discriminatory legislation. The Human Rights Campaign is America's largest civil rights organization working to achieve lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer LGBTQ equality. By inspiring and engaging all Americans, HRC strives to end discrimination against LGBTQ people and realize a world that achieves fundamental fairness and equality for all. As an advocate of equal rights for all members of the LGBTQ community, HRC believes that transgender people should be able to obtain accurate identity documents, including birth records that reflect who they truly are. HB 1076 would write discrimination into law by prohibiting transgender people from correcting the gender marker on their birth certificate, jeopardizing their safety and well-being. Transgender people who are unable to obtain accurate identity documents that reflect their gender frequently experience violence and discrimination. According to the 2015 U.S. Transgender Survey, nearly 1/3 of transgender people with incongruent documents were verbally harassed, denied benefits or service, asked to leave, or assaulted. Furthermore, identity documents are required by employers for payroll purposes, and incongruent documents can lead to a transgender employee being outed at work, which may result in discrimination. Incongruent documents can also cause unnecessary expense or suspicion by the government when a person dealing has unmatched documents. Moreover, this bill is clearly unconstitutional and would undoubtedly subject the state to costly litigation. Just last year, a federal court ruled that a newly enacted Idaho law barring transgender people from correcting their birth certificate gender marker violated the court's 2018 ruling, striking down a similar Idaho policy on equal protection grounds. The court noted in its 2018 decision that allowing individuals to, quote, obtain a birth certificate with a listed sex that aligns with their gender identity promotes the health, well-being, and safety of transgender people without impacting the rights of others, unquote, and ordered the state to begin issuing birth certificates that accurately reflect gender identity. Furthermore, earlier this month, another federal court found that unnecessary barriers to transgender Alabama residents obtaining driver's licenses that accurately reflect their gender identity are also unconstitutional. Thank you for the opportunity to submit testimony, and we strongly urge you to reject this unconscionable attack on the constitutional rights and the dignity and safety of transgender people. Sincerely, Sarah Warbelow, Legal Director, Human Rights Campaign. Now for my own remarks, Mr. Chairman. You know, I've been around this process for a long time, going back to 1987 when I started as Attorney General for South Dakota. And I will confess, I don't recall seeing legislation that starts out with 2.5 pages of legislative findings intended to justify and cover up what is clearly an anti-transgender bill. Anybody that suggests to you that it's something different than that is not being honest with you. That's exactly who this bill is aimed at. And I have to ask, what's the problem? The good representative has handed out a handout that has been addressed by one judge in South Dakota. One. It's not something that our courts are faced with regularly, or when faced with it in those marginal cases has found difficulty dealing with the exception of one judge. I also would like to, I'm just curious, where's the Department of Health? How come they're not here as a proponent of this bill? They're the record keeper. Why aren't they here supporting this bill if it's such an issue in South Dakota? It's just interesting to me, again, in recent years, those of you that have been here for the last 8 years, we see one of these types of bills every single year. Every single year we see something that's focused at some of the most marginalized people in our society. They're all, and we're all God's children. But yet to subject them to this type of discrimination, in my opinion, is just not fair. It's unconscionable. I'd urge your opposition to House Bill 1076. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. And I believe we have online testimony at this point. Is it, I got to put my glasses on. Janelle's? I'm not sure. I hope I didn't mispronounce your name too bad. Are you online right now? All right, can you unmute if you're muted? We have the online testimony. Okay, we'll take testimony from in the room here while we figure this out. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Seymour. My pronouns are he, they, and it. I represent myself. And I would like to thank the committee for the opportunity to testify in opposition of HB House Bill 1076. This bill was written without an accurate understanding of intersex or non-binary identity. Many people are born intersex. Many people transition to intersex. Since starting hormone therapy, my own physical sexual characteristics do not fall neatly into either category of male or female. Many cisgender people even fail to meet the criteria of this false dichotomy. Unless you have had a test done, you do not know what your chromosomes are. Unless you've had a test done, you don't know what your hormone levels are. When a cisgender woman goes through menopause or has her uterus or breast removed, her womanhood is not revoked. So why do we force transgender women to jump through these impossible hoops that many cis women can't even jump through? There is no other group of people who has to change the gender marker on their birth certificate. And that alone is discriminatory. To remove us from even having that option is to make a mockery of us. Because of its enforcement of an imaginary gender and sex binary, this bill would prevent me from ever having a gender marker on my birth certificate that accurately reflects my gender or sex. Thank you for your time. Please vote no on HB 1076.
Okay. Thank you. I think we have Jet online right now. If you're there, would you like to introduce yourself and go ahead and start your testimony?
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Oh, okay, thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Jet Janellis, and I am the Advocacy Manager at the ACLU of South Dakota. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to testify in opposition of House Bill 1076 today. The ACLU of South Dakota opposes House Bill 1076 because of the harm it will cause to transgender and non-binary South Dakotans. Aside from the harmful message this bill sends, it also suffers from severe legal flaws that render it unconstitutional. House Bill 1076 relates to the information recorded on a South Dakota birth certificate. If passed, the bill would prevent transgender South Dakotans from correcting a birth certificate to reflect their identity and force them to go through life with an incorrect designation on that document. Respectfully, it is more than a letter or a word on a document. Given that birth certificates are used as evidence of identity at work, in government offices, and more, this bill would force transgender people to disclose their private medical information when starting a new job, when applying for certain housing, and any other time they would need to produce their birth certificate. This is not only inconvenient or potentially humiliating, but may very well threaten the safety of the transgender person. Forcing transgender people to disclose their transgender status can lead to discrimination, harassment, loss of opportunity, violence, and even death. Aside from the danger of outing a transgender person or forcing the birth certificate to out them, this bill presents several constitutional issues that the state would likely not be able to overcome were it forced to suspend the legislation in court. First, House Bill 1076 violates the First Amendment because it would require trans people to display a birth certificate with the state's legally imposed view of their sex, rather than the reality of their identity. Second, House Bill 1076 violates transgender people's right to equal protection. The clear purpose of this law is to prevent transgender people from updating their birth certificate. We know this is the purpose because under House Bill 1076, only sex cannot be updated on birth certificates, and even then, only transgender people cannot correct their sex marker. While the bill states that it is intended to advance government interest in maintaining accurate records, requiring trans people to have a birth certificate that does not reflect their actual sex is not tailored in any way to meet that interest under any constitutional standard of review. It certainly cannot satisfy heightened scrutiny, which would be required for laws to discriminate based on sex and transgender status. In summary, despite what you may have heard today, this bill is not about uniform decision making. We could easily have a uniform decision that allows transgender people to obtain birth certificates that reflect their reality. It is not about accurate vital records. These records can easily include transgender status in a way that protects transgender people's privacy. It is not about confused judges. We trust judges are capable of making decisions based on the information in front of them. Instead, this bill is about erasing transgender identity from their own identifying documents. It is about depriving transgender people of their right to equal protection under the law. For these reasons, I respectfully urge you to vote no on House Bill 1076. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And will you be staying online to answer questions if there are any?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other opponent testimony?
Yes, this is Heather Krause of the Young Democrats of South Dakota.
Okay, go ahead. Thank you.
I'm here on behalf of the Young Democrats of South Dakota to speak out against House Bill 1076. I'm disheartened, angry, and frustrated that while our state continues to suffer at the hands of a pandemic, we have legislators introducing harmful, discriminatory, and unnecessary legislation that's only purpose to make certain South Dakotans feel unwelcome, disrespected, and devalued. While our teachers wait for pay raises, while our small businesses fight to stay open, and while our healthcare system continues to run a 10-month marathon of saving lives and now administering vaccines, Representative Deutsch wastes little time bringing forth legislation that offers zero solutions to the problems we actually face in this state. Representative Deutsch, you claim to come forward with humility and not hate, but let us be clear, this is hateful legislation. You discuss vital documents and the need to have them reflect accurate information. I agree. These documents are vital, and they should reflect accurate information. Being respected and valued for your true gender identity is also vital. It is vital for the trans community to feel welcome. It is vital for them to document their preferences. It is vital that you recognize that the more you bring forth this type of legislation, the more you are telling people they don't matter, that they don't belong, and that their life is left. You claim to bring forth a solution. This is not a solution to a problem because, quite frankly, there is no problem. If you are so focused on the differences between men and women, I would love to discuss with you the differences in pay between men and women, the constant fight for men, such as yourself, over the bodies of women, and the fact that more women have lost their jobs during the pandemic compared to men. There is a lot of discussion amongst proponents on the need to respect the documents. To be clear, you're placing more respect to a piece of paper than you are a human being. I suggest you reflect on your priorities. South Dakota claims to be an open state for all. If we are going to make this claim, then we need to act as such. The more we continue to challenge the validity and value of this community, the more our state will suffer the loss of life and suicide. The more we continue to ignore the needs of the trans community, the more we will be acknowledged as a backward state that refuses to support its entire community. And the more you choose to ignore the rights of human beings, the more you are disgracing your role as representative person. I respectfully ask that the committee vote like this. So, thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you. We have about 5 minutes left. Is there any other opponent testimony? Is there any other opponent? Oh, yes, excuse me. Dylan Daniels online. Yes, go ahead and begin your testimony. Introduce yourself first, please.
Yes. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Dylan Daniels. I'm representing myself. I also volunteer on the board of the South Dakota nonprofit, the Transformation Project, that serves our trans and two-spirit South Dakotans. I'm an Indigenous South Dakota man. I'm a father and a soon-to-be nurse who also happens to be two-spirit and transgender myself. 2 years ago, as I began applying for nursing programs, a top priority and huge source of anxiety for me was making sure that my identification documents aligned. I was already accustomed to fearing harassment because my license did not match my perceived gender, but now I was also worried that a contradiction on my paperwork could possibly deny me an opportunity that I had been working very hard for. Like many transgender individuals, I've often experienced gender dysphoria that can arise from an incongruence between body and mind. But the day that my first gender marker was changed from an F to an M, the tension lifted a little, and it was like things fell into place in a type of congruence that could only be described as euphoria. That little M changed things for me in a profound way that day, and I realized that I am privileged to have my gender fall squarely into a binary in the first place. Accurate personal documentation is an essential right, and from a bureaucratic perspective, a gender marker change is a simple correction on a piece of paper. But for the thousands of transgender, gender nonconforming, and two-spirit South Dakotans like myself that I am speaking on behalf of this morning, to us, it is a message that we matter enough to have the same basic human rights and opportunities as anyone else. And it goes a long way toward helping us feel a little more safe in an often unkind world. So with this, I ask that you take into full consideration the damage House Bill 1076 would have on real people like us and vote no. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you. And I would ask maybe that you could stay online too in case there's any questions for you. Is there any other opponent testimony? We have Ann Dillenschneider. Hopefully I pronounced that right.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead and introduce yourself and where you're from, and then go ahead and begin your testimony.
Okay, and I'm trying to figure out how to work this so that you can see me, and I think you can maybe. Okay. Can you see me? That's okay. Okay. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I am Reverend Dr. Ann Schneider, and I began accompanying transgender people in 1992 when I was serving as a United Methodist pastor, and I am still ordained clergy. I have a PhD in clinical psychology. I'm licensed as an LPCMH, that's a mental health professional counselor in South Dakota. I am one of the first healthcare providers in the world to earn a specialty credential in transgender healthcare, and I'm the only provider in South Dakota with that credential. HR 1076 is fundamentally flawed because it's based on a false premise. Gender is not subjective, as the bill states. It is a part of who we are biologically and medically. On May 25th, 2019, the 195 member countries of the World Health Organization, including the United States, determined, based on over 50 years of peer-reviewed, international, replicated scientific research, the gender incongruence, and that's when a person's body and apparent sex doesn't match their biological gender, is a biological medical condition. Gender is based on at least 12 genetic markers and DNA signaling, hormone receptivity in utero, the uterine environment, brain structures, and other factors. So beginning on January 1st of next year, 2022, all medical providers, all health systems, and all insurance companies in the world, including the United States, will be using the new ICD-11. That is the coding structure that we use for treating patients. All of us around the world will be coding gender incongruence as a medical condition. In addition, for years the federal government has recognized gender incongruence as a biological condition and allowed United States citizens to change their gender on identification through the State Department and Homeland Security in the form of passports and through the Social Security Administration. Of course, that is done with medical documentation, just as changes in South Dakota are done. In South Dakota, the birth certificate amendment process that has been used already requires a judicial order. Now you've got to remember, we are not talking about changing a birth certificate. The paperwork for an amendment order, which still lists the original birth sex, the assumed sex, includes documentation from the person's physician, usually their endocrinologist. So House Bill 1076 is based on a false premise. Gender is not subjective. It is part of who we are biologically and medically. In addition, 1076 quite literally pits South Dakota against the federal government and the rest of the world. As a result, if this bill passes, it will tie up our state in needless, expensive legal battles that the state will eventually lose. This bill is a waste of our state's financial and legal resources. And if you'd like some additional information about gender incongruence, you might want to review the January 21st episode last week, the South Dakota Public Broadcasting's On Call with a Prairie Doctor. That evening, Sanford endocrinologist Keith Hansen and I both addressed the biology of gender incongruence. That might be helpful to you as a committee. Thank you for your time, and please vote no on House Bill 1076.
Okay, thank you. And with that, we'll have to close the opponent testimony. And would you like a rebuttal? Good morning again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate the opportunity to provide rebuttal. Couple of issues. Number one, many of the opponents spoke about a gender marker. You know, if you do a search on our statutes, You won't find anything. There's no such thing as a gender marker in our statutes. In fact, the word gender does not appear anywhere in state law. We are talking about sex, and sex cannot be changed. Gender is something different, and I understand that the people that struggle with their own human identity as a man or a woman, or frankly, there are, depending upon the resources you look at, there are in excess of 100 different genders. And in fact, before a South Dakota court right now, there's a young woman that is asking the court to change her sex on her birth certificate to non-binary. So it opens up a significant can of worms. We're talking about biology, and I know in the healthcare industry, there's significant differences in the way men and women respond to medications, are treated physiologically. I understand that in the dental profession, dentists can take courses to identify if a man or a woman, to identify if a person is a man or a woman based on forensic evidence, looking just at their teeth, I mean, that's how different we are. Maybe their jaws, I don't know the specifics of it, but I mean, we have reasons to differentiate between men and women, and either biology matters or it doesn't. Every bill that we put forward is a bill that can be referred, is a bill that can be taken to court. What's happened in Idaho doesn't necessarily reflect what's going to happen in South Dakota. It's a different state, a different system. So I will, stand by for questions. I ask you just to keep your eye on the focus of the bill. There are numerous judges that have decided in either direction. It's not just one. There's numerous judges throughout the state and in different circuits. Particularly the Second Circuit, I've read 15 different court cases. Second Circuit is from the Sioux Falls area, and they're struggling. And you've seen that if you had the ability to peruse those documents. So with that, I will go back to my chair and be ready for questions.
Okay, thank you. With that, I will open it up to committee questions. Representative Perry.
Mr. Chair, for the sponsor, please.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I thank you for your testimony and your information, but I'm looking at the birth certificate, and can you tell me the significance of why they have the date of birth, why they have the sex, and why they have their county of birth, and why is this notarized and why is it signed?
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Mr. Chair. So all of those things that you referenced are material facts that are supposed to be recorded at the time of birth to be vital records that the state can use to collect data. It's signed and notarized because it's an official document of the state. It recognizes the importance to society in that it is an accurate reflection of what has actually been happening.
Okay, I think Representative Healy was next, and we'll go down the other.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Question for the prime sponsor.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Thank you. How many court cases have you seen within the past few years when it comes to changing sex on a birth certificate?
I've read somewhere shy of 20.
Did you hear from any judges about this issue? Did they ever reach out to you to
inform you that this is a problem in our state?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
you have before you documents from several judges who have expressed concern, challenge, and frustration. But I don't reach out to judges on anything. I reach out to legislators and have not communicated with judges on any issue ever. That's just not the way I operate. I operate within this branch.
Mr. Chair? So just to clarify, you reached out to receive these letters. They didn't reach out to you that this was an actual problem in the state of South Dakota?
I simply researched the cases in South Dakota and came up with those. And they're available for any of us to read. There's many, many more.
Mr. Chair, one final question.
One more, yes.
Why is the Department of Justice not here to testify?
You know, I've never seen the Department of Justice testify in the legislature. Never.
Okay, thank you. Representative Rayfield?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Question for the sponsor.
Mr.
What
Chair.
Thank you. What other situations allow an individual to change their birth certificate?
Specifically sex.
Any component of the birth certificate?
Well, if there's an error, it can be changed under current law.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Are you aware of whether or not you can change your birth certificate for adoptions?
You cannot change your sex for adoption. Remember, I had this conversation about material facts versus legal facts. Adoption is a legal process involving legal facts. And when there is legal proof, you can change it. There has to be some type of a biologic proof, if you will, to change biologic facts. And those simply don't exist.
Thank you. I have one additional question, but I'm not sure who it would go to.
Okay, that's
That's
fine.
okay.
Go ahead, ask.
I heard some comments about other bills in other states with the same type of legislation. I was wondering if somebody could overview, I believe it was a gentleman that was an opponent, about what has happened in those other states that have passed similar legislation. I just need a re-overview, please.
I would be able to do that.
Okay, I'm not sure who has, Jet, is that you responding?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, so, as of December, we saw a similar ban, struck down unconstitutional in Ohio. That's Ray B. McLeod. Corbett Taylor, was in Alabama. Arroyo Gonzalez v. Rosello Tavares was in Puerto Rico. SBV Barron was in Idaho, which is the case that, Rankin Payne, I believe, brought up. Lovey Johnson was in Michigan. KLC State Department of Administration and Division of Motor Vehicles was in Alaska. And all of these were, where it was struck down on the term.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? Are there any other committee questions? This is a difficult subject, so I'll give you a couple of seconds to see if anybody has anything they've come up with. Okay, seeing no other questions, Representative Perry?
Because Mr. Tellehusen was up here a minute ago, I'll have him come up and I'll ask the question again.
Okay, thank you.
You get to introduce yourself and things like that first.
Thank you, you, Mr. Chairman. Roger Tellinghusen, lobbyist for the Human Rights Campaign. I'm not aware of I didn't hear the question from Representative Perry.
I didn't ask it yet,
Okay.
so you can't be aware of it.
All right, perfect.
In your testimony, you mentioned the LGBTQ, and you also mentioned all the different things that, with human rights that you were concerned about. My question to you would be, should the birth certificate be accurate? And that's a yes or no question.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? Get your mic. Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? Okay, I will close the public testimony and questions, and we'll move into committee discussion and or action. Is there any discussion? Representative Perry?
I think there are other people here that would like to say something, and they're being shy at this point, but this is a really interesting case that we're working on, and it's a real important project or important law or important proposed designation here. But why does it matter? I think one of the people that came up and testified said, why does it matter what data is official, and then should it be accurate? And I believe that the sponsor has said, he is not saying that we should not have a gender change in our life. He's not saying any of those things. What he's saying is that if you're from Minnehaha, that's where you were born. And if you're born female, that's what you were born. And so what he's saying is, we just need to make sure that this document is accurate and stays accurate. Now, I don't believe that we want to get in a position where we say there can't be someone that makes a change in the future. There could be a distinguishing thing that goes along with this, maybe, that says there's been a gender change, but I believe that the sponsor is saying that this should stay accurate, and I believe the sponsor is correct.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other comments? Yes, Representative Cox.
It's become pretty clear that there is a process in place to change one's birth certificate. And if the process itself needs work for clarification, let's fix the process, not eliminate this process. There's only one state that currently does not allow a change like this to a birth certificate. And federal identity documents can be changed as well through a fairly simple process. It's important that there's consistency across these documents. And you know, the movement over the last few years is clearly not in the direction that South Dakota seems to be trying to take this. It's really a futile attempt to go against the grain on this, and it's going to harm South Dakota in many ways. We are gonna lose in court, we're gonna lose business investment in our state, we're gonna lose talented individuals. I'd like to put an end to the focus on these issues and just get back to what really matters to South Dakotans.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion or action?
Chair.
Representative Healy.
Mr. Chair, I have a lot to say. We heard from proponents about sex protections in Title IX.
Excuse, I'm going to just interrupt for a second. If you're going to make a motion, we don't do introductory remarks.
No, I'm not making a motion.
Okay, I just want to make sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We heard from proponents about sex protections in Title IX and to maintain public health. But from my records, what I have seen, there are only 10 instances since 2017. 10 instances in this state where people have been looking to change their gender in a court. And many of you know this, but I am an analyst by day. When I am not here, that is what I do. This data is nowhere close to being statistically significant when it comes to public health care. We're talking about a fairly small population here. Public health won't be affected by 10 birth certificate records. And if we're worried about this, then I think we can have a conversation about designated at birth and and gender identity on birth certificates, but that's for another day, not today. Trans people are just trying to live their lives, and I want to acknowledge everyone out there right now that I accept you and I support you, and I'm here to speak on your behalf, especially when we are fighting legislation like this. I don't think it's our state government's job to mandate their identity. I find this legislation incredibly disrespectful. It's incredibly disrespectful that we have to continue to do this every year. It's infuriating. I don't know why we need to legislate this. Why do we assume as legislators that we know what's right? We're not the ones who live this life every day. Why do we need to be in people's businesses? And time again in this chamber, we discuss not disrupting local control, not legislating true problems, and giving freedom to all South Dakotans, and we are not doing that today. We are disrupting the lives of a vulnerable population. And what I really truly think we are missing here today is empathy and compassion. We're trying to make a really big decision here today about trans people and their identities, and I can't help but be reminded that today, the humanity of trans people is missing from this discussion. And we are seeing birth certificates being weaponized against them, and that is not right. It is not the proper place for this discussion in our state legislature. So if you believe that trans people exist and deserve basic respect under the law, please vote no if we do motion to pass this. Thank you.
Cal, make one small comment. And probably not it's a short comment, not small. Discrimination is wrong at any level. And the piece of paper I don't see as discriminatory. I see the actions of others about that piece of paper as the discrimination. And I don't see that this bill targets anybody other than telling what the natural genetic parts at birth indicate that the sex is. It doesn't matter what kind of discrimination we see, it's always wrong. So, that's just my opinion on this, but I will keep it open for any committee action or more comments. Representative Albert.
Just want to make a comment. You can believe that a male is a male and a female is a female and still respect people's civil liberties. I think if we're trying to make the court processes more efficient, more uniform, there's a better way to go about that.
Representative Healy.
I move this bill to the 41st day.
Representative Healy moves 41st day.
Second.
Seconded by Representative Kynes.
Substitute motion, Mr. Chair.
Representative Jensen offered substitute motion. State your motion.
I move to pass House Bill 1057.
Representative Jensen.
1076, correct.
Representative Jensen moves to pass on House Bill 1076. Is there a second?
Mr. Chair, second.
Representative Perry seconds that motion. Is there a discussion on the motion?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I certainly understand and sympathize and empathize with those folks that are in opposition to this bill, but I'd like to just remind folks that our Judeo-Christian heritage is based on the Bible, the Word of God. Our state motto is, under God, the people rule. And in the first book of the Bible, we are told that God created them, referring to Adam and Eve, male and female. So it couldn't be clearer in my mind, and I would appreciate a positive vote on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other comments on the motion? Is there any other discussion on the motion? Okay, so the motion from Representative Jensen is, substitute motion is do pass House Bill 1076. Representative Perry seconded. I'll ask the secretary to call the roll.
Representatives Albert,
No.
Davis,
No.
Healy,
No.
Jensen,
Aye.
Hines,
No.
Skimmons,
No.
Gary,
Aye.
Rayfeld,
No.
St. John,
No.
Wise,
Aye.
Lacy,
Aye.
Deutsch,
Aye.
Jensen.
Aye.
6 ayes, 7 nays.
Yeah, I didn't really hear that, so I had to refer here. So we have seven noes, 6 ayes, if that's correct. I want to make sure I'm correct. The bill fails. Yes, now back to the first motion. I shouldn't say the bill failed, excuse me. The motion, substitute motion failed, so, yeah, we gotta keep things in order. So, but we're back to the original motion of moving to the 41st day from Representative Healy, seconded by Representative Kines. Is there any other discussion on that motion? Okay, I'll ask the secretary to call the roll.
Representatives Albert,
Aye.
Davis,
Aye.
Healy,
Aye.
Jensen,
No.
Hines,
Aye.
Skimmons,
Aye.
Gary,
No.
Rayfeld,
Aye.
St. John,
Aye.
Weiss,
No.
Lacy,
No.
Deutsch,
No.
Jensen.
No.
7 ayes, 6 nays.
Okay, with that, House Bill 1076, moved to the 41st day. Is there any other discussion? Committee? Motion by